Okay, hello everybody. Thanks for coming to this panel. I'm happy to see so many people here interested in the topic of our panel, which is post-quantum cryptography. And specifically, we're talking about the migration process from our classical cryptography to our new post-quantum schemes. So I'm very happy to have three excellent panelists here, and let me introduce them one at a time. So immediately to my left here is Bill Newhouse. He's a cybersecurity engineer at NIST. And he's not part of the team that's selecting the NIST PQC standards, but he is part of the Applied Cybersecurity Division, where he works with industry and government partners on the migration to PQC. So we'll be appreciating his insight on the migration process specifically. To Bill's left, we have Sophie Schmieg, and she is a cryptography engineer at Google. She heads the ISE crypto team, which is responsible for Google's transition to post-quantum cryptography. She's a mathematician by training with a PhD in algebraic geometry from University of Ulm. So if we have time at the end and you have any algebraic geometry questions, I'm sure she'd be happy to accommodate that. Finally, last but not least, we have Adi Shamir. He is the Borman Professor of Computer Science at Weizmann Institute. It feels kind of silly for me to be giving an introduction to Adi here at RSA because his contributions to cryptography are well known to most of us. They're wide-ranging and too many to list exhaustively here. He's the recipient of many awards, including the Turing Award in 2002. And if it weren't for him, we may all be here at the RA conference, which doesn't sound maybe about two-thirds as exciting as the RSA conference, but actually more realistically, if not for him, we probably wouldn't be here at all, given his many contributions to the field. That's our esteemed panel. I have some discussion questions that I've planned, and I also hope to save some time at the end for audience questions. It would be great to hear what you have in mind. So start thinking of questions that you have. Good, so let's get started. So I wanted to start, okay. I'm done with the introduction. I think my microphone is on. Good. So I wanted to start just by giving some context to why we're talking about post-quantum cryptography in the first place. So I wanted to ask Sophie, why do we need post-quantum cryptography? What's wrong with our current cryptography?
Yeah. So our current cryptography is like mostly based on RSA and elliptic curves, Diffie-Hellman. And it turns out that both of these problems are based on the same underlying mathematical hard problem called the abelian subgroup problem. And it turns out that there is a computer architecture, a theoretical computer architecture in these quantum computers that happens to be very good at solving this abelian hidden subgroup problem. And if someone could build such a computer, then they could basically break the modern internet as we know it, because all encryption, all asymmetric encryption, all asymmetric signatures would just not be secure anymore. The theoretical nature of the quantum computer is somewhat less theoretical in the sense that like people are working fairly actively of actually making them a reality. And the estimates vary a bit, but like the sort of conservative estimate is that like 10 to 15 years from now, we might be looking at this machine. And why are we caring about this now? Well, A, it takes a long time to change anything about cryptography. It's usually very deeply embedded in your system, so changing it will take easily 10 years. And the other thing is that an adversary doesn't need the quantum computer now. They can just store the ciphertext now. And in 10 years, if they're still interested in this 10-year-old ciphertext, which are definitely things that are still interesting, they can use their quantum computer to break that transcript that they have. So in some ways, we need to defend against this not yet existing machine now. And like, even if they end up not being possible or something, we need to defend against this because, yeah, I don't know if we want to risk having all of our current communication compromised by this threat.
So One of the reasons post-quantum cryptography is at the front of everybody's mind is because of the recent NIST standardization process. So Bill, as a representative of NIST, would you like to just give us a status update about the standardization process?
Yeah, of course. Last summer, the third round completed, and NIST identified a key encapsulation method, Kyber, crystals Kyber, and then 3 digital signatures as standards moving forward into the next round. And the conversation is continuing on each of those through a forum, through meetings, workshops, and the expectation is this summer to draft the standards around them. Additionally, after the third round ended, another call was made for diversity in digital signatures as well to add to that. And so that's ongoing with a deadline for submission of June 1st. So if you haven't submitted and you're in that space, that kind of expertise, NIST hopes you will, so that those can be considered moving into the future. So the way I look at it in a very simplistic model is there will be some standards that come out as a draft, and they'll be more formally as FIPS documentation, and the kind of FIPS is Federal Information Processing Systems language for the things that we have to do for the federal government. It'll codify it in a way that the arguments then begin as we move from that to final, which would be in 2024. And I'm sure I left out some details, but it's all open and transparent. And I hope you're aware that you can join this PQC forum and keep track of the arguments and the conversations as it moves forward.
Great. So NIST is standardizing both a key agreement mechanism and a signature scheme. So I wanted to ask the panel just to
By
open.
the way,
Oh,
there's no water available here.
you're welcome to share my water.
You can only catch it here once.
Sorry.
Sorry. We can fix this. Ken's going to fix this.
So NIST is standardizing both digital signature algorithms and key agreement algorithms. And so I wanted to ask the panel, how is the thought process different? Because digital signatures and key agreement are two fundamentally different kinds of primitives. And so how should we be thinking differently about transitioning to new digital signature schemes versus transitioning to new key agreement schemes? So whoever would like to speak about that.
I can take that one. Right, I can. So I think there's like several differences between these two things. One thing is that key agreement schemes are usually used within like fairly specific protocols, like within TLS, SSH, and so on. So there are only a fairly limited number of things that need to be transitioned. Signatures, on the other hand, they're kind of all over the place. And so while encryption, like key encapsulation, is somewhat more tractable, but also more urgent because store now, decrypt later, signatures are vastly more complex, and there the problem is more actually covering all of it in time is going to be very hard.
Are there any cases where signatures are vulnerable to the kind of something similar to like capture now, decrypt later? Or is it just not a...
There is a specific subgroup of these, namely when you have firmware on a device that needs signed firmware updates, and the public key that you use to sign this firmware update is actually burned into the silicon. And then you have the situation that if you want your device to have a lifetime that's longer than 10 years, then you should start thinking about signatures in that case. And in that case, use the hash-based signatures. Like those are the best solution for this problem.
Let's see if my voice holds. So I believe that there are cases in which signatures have to remain valid for a considerable amount of time. For example, very important legal deeds, the deed for your house. As long as you hold the house, you want to make sure that the deed is valid and enforceable. However, these are very, very rare cases. And therefore, I believe that most signatures are going to become totally useless or unimportant in a time frame of 10 years. There isn't really the case of somebody recording state secrets which had been encrypted and then decrypting them 50 years later. I also want to mention that there are easy mitigations in case you are really worried about digital signature being debated in court many years later. Suppose that the deed to your house had not been signed; it will be forged later on. The claim is that in 2023 you have sold the house to someone else. That someone else makes the claim in 2050 when quantum computers are available, and therefore he can forge a signature, an RSA signature, and claims that this signature was produced in 2023. You understand the setup? And I believe that this kind of backdating of legal documents can be easily resolved by saying that any digital signature which is now debated in court after more than 10 years had to be recorded, time-stamped by some authority. So all the long-term security documents, if they are time-stamped, that indeed this digital signature, RSA digital signature, was produced in 2023, it will continue to be valid deep into the future, even if that particular RSA key can be broken by classical techniques or by quantum techniques. So it will prevent somebody from moving into the future and backdating signature which is generated in the future. So the court will just say that any digital signature which is not recorded, time-stamped, it could be on some blockchain, it could be in some kind of special service, unless it is time-stamped, it is not enforceable 10 years after the invention of quantum computers.
So next, I'd like to ask the panel to speculate a little bit about the timeline here, because maybe a lot of the audience members are wondering when they will be asked to make these huge changes and retool their entire infrastructure in their own organizations. So I'd like to use the analogy to the way that we saw encryption become the default for internet traffic. It took some time, but then there was some inflection point at which most of the internet traffic is now encrypted under TLS. So I'm wondering when do you expect to see a similar kind of inflection point where, not just in the context of TLS, but in general within cryptography, where these post-quantum algorithms are going to be the default?
So maybe I want to start by saying that the transition is going to be painful. Make no mistake about it. The new algorithms are not drop-in replacements, which are going to use the same size of signatures or keys, the secret keys, the public keys. Everything is going to be of different size, typically much larger, some exceptions. And therefore, there will be many applications which are going to break if you are trying to move to the new post-quantum. So because it is going to be so painful, in my opinion, companies are actually going to try to avoid it for as long as possible, unless they are forced by regulations or by public opinion campaigns, etc. But it's going to be harder to move to the post-quantum algorithms than it was to move from DES to AES, for example. And remember that transition also took a very long time, and it happened only after groups of researchers showed that they could actually build a special purpose chip that could break DES.
So if I may, I work at an applied cybersecurity center, and we're complementary to the standardization process in the sense that there are things we can start doing, and we are doing, and we've got 20 collaborators signed up to join us and work with us. cooperative research and development agreements. They're bringing their technology to us, and in that technology, there are discovery tools that they're bringing to bear. And so discovering what you're using is a first step towards identifying what you're relying on, and then putting that into some engine that allows you to do risk analysis and then prioritize your decisions about where you need to go first. At the federal US government level, these are not standards yet. You can't implement them and use them. So we have a work stream that's focused on, well, if we're going to do TLS and SSH and X.509 and using hardware security modules, what can we do today to show you industry folks, to show you applied cryptographers, what 20 groups of people with smart intelligence and working together can put in front of you to make you get one step ahead of the process. These are early days, but it's important to sort of show the art of the possible, identify where it's going to be very, very hard, and get that in front of people so that we can start making other decisions that would also mitigate risk that aren't just about replacing these algorithms, but identifying your high-value assets and knowing what you're protecting. I think it's a really good opportunity to jump into conversations that are already happening in your zero trust conversations, in your continuous monitoring. You know, I want to monitor my stuff. I want to know what's at my endpoints. These are all part of that. And so if you can gently walk towards that with what we can show you at our lab, we think we're going to give you a good opportunity. There are other groups doing that too. We're not the only group that has collaborators, but we're really happy to have everybody join us that we've signed up so far.
Yeah, the way that I like thinking about it is, in theory, it should be very easy to actually switch these algorithms. In practice, it is going to be extremely excruciating hard. And the reason why it's not easy is actually things that we should have, like, that we should do anyways. Like, we should know what kind of cryptography is running in our systems. We should know how can we change it if necessary and so on. And in some ways, using that post-quantum transition is also very useful to move the general security posture of your organization forward, because it kind of forces you to do these things that you kind of want to do anyway, and in this case, you have to. So
why do you want to do anyway? You are forced to do it by the world bringing on quantum computers, but saying that you want to move to new algorithms?
I don't think that you want to move to new algorithms. You want to have the ability to. I think that, let's say there was a scare for half a day, I think 2 years ago or so, that RSA was broken, which turned out to be very much not the case.
The Chinese paper.
But, no, the Chinese paper was one, but there was also Schnorr's paper that yeah, I will not comment further on the Schnorr paper. There are reasons for what happened there. But yeah, in case something like that happened, neither RSA nor ECDH is proven to be secure. We haven't found any way of attacking it for decades, but in theory, someone could come up and just find a way to solve it on your cell phone. I don't think that will happen, but just in case something like this happens, you want to have the ability to change it. And being in a situation where you're like, oh, okay, I guess I go home now, is maybe not the ideal state to be in. So having the ability to change algorithms is, I think, a good thing. I agree that if there wasn't the actual threat of quantum computers, nobody would switch from a 32-byte ECDH exchange to a 1,000 something byte Kyber ciphertext. But being able to, I think, is a good thing.
So Adi, you mentioned that people didn't seem to be willing to switch to AES or not willing to retire DES until it was convincingly shown that DES was broken. And I think of the way that TLS became standard on the internet was kind of prompted by the Snowden disclosures. And so I'm just wondering if it's going to take a catalyst like that to get people to really adopt PQC, or can we muster up the courage without a huge sense of urgency looming over us? can I write my next research paper without a deadline coming up, that kind of thing.
There was also the SHA-1 had a similar fate that it needed to be shown that there's a practical thing. I think the White House paper is maybe worth mentioning, but I think Bill should
Yeah,
speak
no,
to that.
there was NSM 10 as a push to move in this direction, and then more recently a memo called M2302, and it put some tasks in front of the agencies. So it's tricky because the inventory was a task, and then a cost thing was thrown in there, and essentially it's a generous ask of our federal agencies to say, think about what you might want to have in this space and give us some cost estimates, because we're going to try to find the funding to make it happen. So money will push it to happen. The memos have some deadlines. Let's say it is 10 years from now. So it's a modernization. It's an agility effort that it feels like it's the right thing to do, because it will clean out things that we've probably not recognized we're still using or know we're using and need to move past. It will also, there'll be other solutions that my project isn't focused on, but mitigating risk by doing other things than doing it the same way we've always done it is now part of the conversation. Not that money they're asking for, but just I think that the U.S. federal government, and then if in Europe, I'm not able to speak for that directly, but I heard another panel, there are pushes happening from the European, from ENISA and others like that to get in this space too.
But I want to talk about the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is, suppose that we replace all our current generation of algorithms by the new algorithms that NIST is going to write the spec for. Are we going to have a stronger protection? I'm far from being convinced that the new post-quantum algorithms are going to remain secure forever. Let me give you just a few hints about why lattice-based schemes, for example, might become breakable, not by quantum, either by quantum or by non-quantum techniques. And we are going to put a lot of trust in those lattices. So as Sophie said before, the Shor algorithm and quantum computers in general are very good at finding secret periodicities. So if you take the number, any number x, and you start raising it to consecutive powers, modulo n, eventually you'll cycle, and the length of the cycle is related to the factorization of n, and therefore if you knew the cycle length, you'll be able to break it. That's the big secret. And quantum algorithms are very good at finding such secret periodic structure. Now I'm looking at lattices, and what is lattices other than periodicities in multiple dimensions? So you don't have one-dimensional periodicity, you have multiple dimensions. And usually in many of the lattice-based schemes, there is one direction where the periodicity is very short. So you have short lattice vector. So in one direction, the points in the lattice are very, very close to each other and perfectly periodic. In other directions, the periodicity is very long. So we know already from Shor that quantum algorithms are very good at finding secret periodicities. Lattices are totally periodic, but in multiple dimensions. I see no reason in the world why somebody will not be able to adapt the secret periodicity algorithm of Shor into higher dimensions.
Oh yeah, there's the dihedral subgroup, dihedral hidden subgroup problem. If you can solve that with a quantum computer, you've broken lattices.
Right.
So it's definitely, like I think the main point there is use hybrid deployments. Never use the schemes by themselves. Like lattice cryptography has more research than some other of these candidates, code-based as well. But we've been trying to factor numbers for a very long time now and haven't been able to. It's
but a lot of progress was made.
Yeah, a lot of progress was made. Like,
yeah.
And number field sieve is like using much more complicated structures in order to actually attack this like factoring. Like I can explain to a high schooler how to factor a number. I can't explain how the number field sieves work. Yeah, having this hybrid deployment is very, very important, because otherwise you're not certain that you're actually improving your situation.
So will NIST, for example, say that all deployments of the new algorithms must be in a hybrid form together with the old algorithm, or people are allowed to just switch to the new algorithms and rely only on those?
It's a loaded question because we're listening, we're trying to figure out what to do in that space, and so it is part of the conversation. I don't have the answers today, and keep those questions coming, because if that's the push, we need to figure out, at least at the lab where I am, what does that look like? What does it mean to implement it? And then at the standards level, how to code, how to document all the things that need to happen in validation and everything else.
My personal recommendation is to only go for hybrids, not to switch to the new algorithms, because we might end up in a situation where, due to a theoretical danger that will not materialize either forever or for a reasonable future, we are actually reducing the security of our
if you look at like the German equivalent, I think the French one as well of NIST, the BSI, they actually say hybrid deployment is mandatory. It's a bit of a complicated question. As far as I know, everybody agrees that you should do hybrid. People don't quite agree how to do hybrid, and I think that is the larger conflict. But I think, yeah, never use them as your own, as the only cryptographic method that you have. You're basically rolling your own crypto. Not quite, but like almost.
Yes.
So 3 of the 4 algorithms that have been selected so far by NIST are based on lattices. We also have Sphinx.
Not only lattices, but structured lattices, which is
lattices.
even worse.
And then we also have Sphinx, which is
It's
hash-based. And certainly some of the same criticisms don't apply to hash-based signatures.
Yeah, for hash-based it's different, because those have a proof that they're secure as long as the hash function is secure. And if you look at any signature scheme, the first step is always to hash whatever your input is. And so if the hash function isn't secure, no signature scheme that I know of is secure. And so the hash-based, they have their own issues, and like you might still want to do hybrid for other reasons, just like avoiding implementation errors and so on. But they are not as like at risk for like someone having a mathematical breakthrough and then they're gone.
So do you think there's been too much focus on the lattice-based schemes? Is it kind of an oversight to have 3 of our 4 eggs in the lattice basket?
You have to remember what happened to the other kinds of schemes. There was one which was based on isogeny graphs, and it was broken completely in a classical way. And it was done after it was it entered into the list of alternate algorithms. I'm talking about Cyc, and the rainbow was based on another principle of multivariate crypto systems. And multivariate crypto systems had a long history of failures. There was the balanced oil and vinegar scheme, which I broke together with Kipnis a long time ago. And there was the S-Flash, which Courtois suggested, and also broken by Jacques Stern and me, several others. So it's very, very difficult to find a good basis for public key cryptography. Public key crypto systems have a lot of conflicting conditions and restrictions. And I'm always amazed that the original 2 schemes of Diffie-Hellman and the RSA have lasted so long. But I wouldn't bet on the lifetime of public key crypto systems. I'm much more comfortable with secret key crypto systems. There we have good primitives, and I believe that they will not be broken in any significant way. But any public key crypto system is going to have some question mark attached to it. And to be frank, if I was concerned with state secrets, which have to be kept for 50 years or 100 years, I would not use any public key crypto system. It will be painful to move the key around, deliver it by hand or by other technique. But if you have such important secrets, don't rely either on the new post-quantum or the old number theoretic ones.
I would in those cases, yes, but like I would do something like Signal Protocol, where I mix the 2 in a ratchet Because the asymmetric ones have nice properties, like forward secrecy is something that you cannot do with symmetric cryptography alone. So I do think that having some asymmetry mixed in, but yeah, like asymmetric schemes.
You're talking about hybrids. Hybrids
Yeah,
are
yeah,
fine.
hybrids, yeah.
Yes, but you wouldn't trust a 100-year secret to the new
I mean,
post-quantum.
we know that like, given that quantum computers, like the whole reason that we're here is that the scheme that was secure for 50 years plus is likely to not be secure for that much longer. And yeah, I completely agree that like, I do think lattices are very, like, given my background, I like know what isogeny crypto does, and it's lattices are everywhere in number theory. Like whenever you try to solve any kind of number theoretic problem where anything is like an integer and small, it will involve a lattice. Like there's ways of breaking RSA using lattices and so on. I do think that they are one of the much better research problems, and it would make number theorists very happy if you could break them. That doesn't mean that you can't break them.
And breaking, remember, you can talk about fully polynomial time algorithm or just improving it to the point where the key size chosen is
Rainbow.
insufficient. Yes.
Like Rainbow was not
Yes.
broken. It was just
Right.
you can recover it in enough.
Now, I want to raise yet another problem, and this is that in any transition to a new set of algorithms, there will be new implementations of more complicated and less well understood designs. And I'm really worried about many buggy implementations. So remember how long it had taken us to debug the various versions of SSL and TLS, and you find all kinds of small problems in paddings and in how you choose the various elements. So I'm afraid that any company that will rush to do the transition will introduce lots of bugs in the implementation, which are going, even if the crypto system itself is very good, it is a new set of potential problems which will have to be weeded slowly over a long period of time.
There is like formal verification. I'm not sure. I'm far from an expert on that. That can help with that problem. I don't know.
TLS was presented to it, and Kenny Patterson kept finding more and more problems.
I worked for a long time with Tidewang, and I think he found like several vulnerabilities in TLS.
Right.
There's certainly like the protocol level vulnerabilities. Ideally, those would not really come into play because they're orthogonal, but who knows? It's like some of the suggestions do change a lot more about TLS than just plugging in Kyber in the encryption, in part because they have to, because Kyber isn't the same as ECDH.
So do you not think we've learned something about how to correctly implement crypto over these last many, many years? Is there no transferable knowledge that we've gained?
It's partially transferable, but we still don't know how to write perfectly secure code. That's the sad state of affairs.
Sure. I wanted to have a chance to ask Sophie about the deployment efforts that you've overseen at Google. So I understand that Google has had some experimental deployments of some of these new schemes.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what you've learned.
Well, we've learned that it's hard. A long story short, we started in 2020, I think, and it's still not fully done in some ways. Like it's getting there. It's like almost done now. The main thing that we did was like a hybrid, like all of the data is still running through standard elliptic curve cryptography. There's nothing that like just is based on PQC. The length requirements are certainly going to be a problem. The performance is somewhat comparable to what we have currently, but there's certainly a lot of problems that will just crop up of like, yeah, there was like the size of the ciphertext was put on the stack, And it turns out that in some devices, under some conditions, the stack was too small, so it literally overflowed. Like, not that someone didn't check the buffer size, it was literally this specific device had a tiny, tiny stack, so it couldn't afford having a kilobyte of data running around. So there's going to be a lot of this kind of problem that happens during any rollout, where you just realize that this device can't actually do it like that. It needs to have something changed around and so on. So yeah, it's definitely I think the biggest thing to take away is that it takes a very long time to actually roll that out. And this is sort of the best case scenario where you control all the endpoints and the entire code stack and so on. And it's still fairly hard to do. So yeah, it's something to do early and to invest in early.
Great. Maybe I want to mention one more thing. So far, we talked about two possibilities, either staying with what we have or moving to a hybrid. There is an additional intermediate step you can take, and this is to harden your current set of algorithms, namely RSA and elliptic curves, so that it will be considerably harder for somebody to do the recording and breaking in the future that we talked about. So there are several different directions. One of them, for example, is to have extreme key agility. What do I mean by that? Remember that in the future, I believe that even when quantum computers arrive, there are going to be few of them, and they are going to be very expensive. We are not going to see Moore's law, where the prices drop to a few dollars per quantum computer, simply because, if you're using the superconducting schemes, you need dilation refrigerators, which are room-size, multi-million-dollar devices, very tricky to maintain. So I believe that quantum computers will remain expensive for the foreseeable future, even if you can squeeze the dimensions of the silicon to smaller sizes, but all the infrastructure around it is going to be huge. In addition, you all remember, some of you may remember the famous quote of an IBM CEO who in the late 40s or early 50s said that he doesn't believe that the world will ever use more than 5 computers. He was, of course, wrong, but he may be right about quantum computers. So if quantum computers will indeed be usable only in order to break RSA and elliptic curve cryptography, and will have no other applications, which might be the case, then the only organizations who are going to try to buy it are going to be the NSA and the GCHQ and the equivalents. So there might be a market of a few hundred such quantum computers. So let's think about quantum computers as being very expensive, very scarce resource. So I'm sure that the NSA, even if it has a quantum computer, is going to concentrate very carefully on the few cases where the data was extremely important. So suppose that you are using RSA, even with the standard size, but you change the key every few seconds. For the NSA, it is going to be flooded with the need to factorize a huge number of different moduli. And it is, unless you are an extreme high-value target, you will probably not bother with you. So one idea is simply to have lots and lots of key exchanges. Idea number 2, flood all the communication links within the organization with lots of new RSA keys, the same way that in order to fight against traffic analysis, where you are measuring, noticing that a country goes on military standby because communication suddenly goes up, if you have fiber optic lines, fill them with key exchanges all the time, new keys, which are just noise, not needed anymore. And the NSA will have to record this, and it will not know which ones to concentrate on, which are the real data. So third approach is to increase the size of the RSA key. And I'm not talking about the extreme step which was taken by Daniel Bernstein, where he talked about a gigabit RSA, but I'm talking about increasing it by a factor of 10. There are algorithms, there are ways how to implement RSA with, say, 32,000 bit key in a way which doesn't slow you down too much. And I published a paper many years ago, which was called RSA for Paranoids, and it was based on the fact that the modulus n is having a relatively small n, p, so one factor of n is relatively small, like 1,000 bits, and all the rest of the size of n is in the big prime number q. And the trick was that if your message is shorter than p, then during the Chinese remainder theory, algorithm, you have to decrypt modulo p and decrypt modulo q. But if the message was smaller than p, decrypting modulo p is enough. You already know what was the plain text. So you don't have to perform the expensive operation of decrypting modulo q, which is, 31,000 bit long. So there are ways how to use much larger keys, and this will require the NSA the NSA will try to break all the recorded messages which were based on 2,000 bit RSA. It's not likely to build a machine which is much more expensive, much bigger, in order to break 32,000 bit key.
But wouldn't a short message be vulnerable to padding oracle attacks?
There are ways how to attack it, but there are solutions to those attacks. So if you know what you're doing, then you're not going to have this problem. You have to prevent a chosen ciphertext attack.
Yeah, but then I guess you could use FO transform, but I guess then
This gets too technical.
Yeah.
What I'm pointing out is that if NSA is going to build a device, and it's going to be a big device, million qubits, very hard to control them and to keep them. And this is the million qubits are needed just to factorize the 2,000-bit modulus. You will have to build much bigger machines in order to factorize larger ones. So it's not changing from polynomial to exponential. It's just having a big work factor added.
Yeah.
So I think we have about 10 minutes left, and I would like to give the audience a chance to ask some questions.
Okay.
We have a microphone up here in the aisle. There's also a microphone handheld in the back. And yeah, go ahead.
It's this is kind of intense stuff. But of course, the future always is. So the question I have, which I had at the beginning, and I didn't hear it answered yet, is how can we be sure that any scheme we come up with will be resistant to quantum abuse in the future?
We are never going to be sure, but if you are going to look to consider the Sphinx Plus scheme, which is based on hash functions, I'm very confident. I don't have a mathematical proof, but the chance that a scheme such as Sphinx, based just on hash functions, is going to be breakable by quantum computers is very small, in my opinion. But life doesn't come with insurance,
I thought Sophie was going to say something.
There is no way to be sure. There is research, and basically, quantum computers are very specialized devices. They can solve very specific problems. I like to joke that they really can solve the abelian hidden subgroup problem and not much else. The quantum scientists get mad when I say that, so they can solve other problems as well. But they are fairly limited in what they actually can compute. There's more research needed, and it's totally possible that any of the schemes are vulnerable to them. But it's similar to the classical threats. We don't know whether or not there is an algorithm out there that can, factor a number in polynomial time on a classical computer. It's yeah, you get confidence by a lot of people trying and it not working out. That is the best that we've managed to do for asymmetric cryptography.
But by all of your estimates, we won't have even one person trying to work it out for at least 10 years.
You can try to work it out on a piece of paper. That's what, like, Shor didn't have a quantum computer and managed to convince everybody that that would work. So yeah, you can try to solve this problem, but yeah, you can't actually implement that attack until you have the quantum computer
Thank
on
you.
realistically sized things.
This is a wonderful panel because we have such a great variety, right? We have academia, we have industry, we have government. That's great. As we move forward into a transition period, there's going to be a lot of need for higher level standards that are built on the algorithmic standards. What do each of you think for, government, industry, academia, what should your respective roles be in sort of creating those standards, making sure they're good, finally deciding how we should hybridize if we're going to use hybrids, all that sort of thing?
I think I'm thinking mostly that we're creating an opportunity to have those discussions at the center and recognizing that those discussions are happening at other pockets of people thinking deeply about this. So I don't have a perfect plan, but the conversations are happening. And what I'm detecting with the collaborators that have already joined us and they've signed cooperative research and development agreements is this strong, really cool willingness to be open and talk about, hey, I want to play with this, and somebody from AWS does a little coding, and then somebody from Microsoft, and they like, hey, it worked, and then they like, now can we do it on an HSM? Cool, and so the enablement there is a very positive thing, and other thing is sort of, I think we can start to normalize the language so that we're speaking clearly more often.
Yeah, and I think that there's NIST as a standards body that is mostly going to do the algorithms, but there are other standards bodies like IETF and so on that are more industry-based and so on that will also, like IETF is in charge of TLS standard, those will also be adapted. Academia always plays a role in these things as well because someone needs to actually attack these things and actually make sure that they're secure. So that it will be a collaboration that just is kind of already existing and will continue there, I think.
I'm curious your thoughts on some emerging technologies for like provably mathematically secure approaches like one-time keypads. Like, do you have any thoughts on that and how that is going to play into this?
The one-time pads are not publicly crypto systems, so I'm not aware of any mathematically proven public key scheme which had been proposed. I don't think it exists.
I think the closest is like hash-based stuff, but even that isn't proven. Like that's proven
Right.
up to a hash function.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, and thanks for your panel here. It's this great, wonderful discussion. I'm curious, you mentioned quite a bit about when we were talking about the final candidates, there are more than a few examples there that are lattice-based. And I was just wondering, when you look at isogeny or code-based or any of the other, or multivariate, what is it about lattice-based that there seems to be a bias against?
The lattice-based schemes won primarily because some corners were cut. And by this I mean they put a lot of additional structure. It is not just additive, but it also has multiplicative structure. That's what we call structured lattices. So in order to be competitive, we took additional risks. As I said in the cryptographers panel yesterday, I personally believe that the only things that need protection from quantum computers are those very long-term, very important secrets and or documents that you want to sign with very long-term validity period. And for those, you don't want to skimp on security. And I think that people chose, for example, various key sizes, and some of them are short. There is a kind of small security level, medium security level, and high security level. I wouldn't recommend using either the low or the medium security level, because the only thing you are trying to protect are very high value secrets. If it's a hybrid, it's the RSA or the elliptic curve which is going to protect you until quantum computers arrive, if at all. So if you want to really protect against such eventuality for a very long period, just take the highest security scheme, which is not lattice-based, and the largest key sizes.
Photochem is still lattice-based.
Sorry?
Photochem is still lattice-based, so you
Yes.
don't need the structured part for lattices. I think lattices in general have, like there is obviously the thing that they are very nice that you can make extra structure and then they're faster and smaller. But the other thing that lattices have going for them is that they are very, very, like they are everywhere. They have been researched about as long as RSA has been researched, if not longer. I don't know when.
But I want to give the advice to NIST here, because I am old enough to remember the AES deliberations. And there were two candidates which all the audiences in the conferences about standardizing AES, there were two schemes that they liked a lot. One is Rheindal, and the other one was Serpent. And it was the consensus of everyone that Serpent was the stronger of the two, because you could break only about 1/4 of the number of rounds. They wanted to use 32 rounds, and people knew how to break only less than 10. And in the case of Rheindal, they suggested only 10 rounds, where already people knew how to break about 6 rounds. So it gave us small margin of safety. Guess what? It was the efficiency, extra efficiency provided by Rheindal, which made it the winner. The designers of Rheindal did a good job. It's still not broken, and you can use it safely. But they cut corners. And they were justified in that case, but I would recommend to NIST that in the post-quantum algorithms, go for the security and put the efficiency way down in the list of
Yeah, you kind of
criteria.
have like also the SHA-3 competition where the opposite happened, where NIST went for the very conservative standard, and it turns out nobody uses SHA-3 because it's too slow.
I
So
know, but I
there
still
is a
recommend
risk.
security over speed.
So just to follow up, you started out with 82 or so submissions, down to 69 and down from there. What do you attribute to the lattice-based survival through all this cryptanalytical breaking and process?
If I gave the impression that I really was a cryptographer, I failed myself. No, I don't have the answer to that. I have colleagues in the back who probably could greet you in the lobby afterwards and help answer that question. Would you please, Matt? Because I don't know, so thank you for the question. I'll follow up with you.
Yeah, I think we'll have to unfortunately make that the last question. Very sorry, but we've reached the end of our time, and here at RSA, they're very serious about the time slots. So I'd just like to thank our panelists again for their insights.
So maybe just one final piece of advice. If you want to switch to post-quantum algorithms, walk, don't run.
Yeah, there you go. Well done.